Hello, welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Nwaka. First, the headlines. NATO's chief says Defense Alliance has agreed to strengthen support for Ukraine following a summit of foreign ministers in Brussels.
A former ambassador to Ukraine predicts Russia's invasion of Ukraine may persist, says Africa should prepare to bear some economic effects.
Plus, Ukraine's keyboard warriors offer alternate way to fight Russia.
Welcome again. Now, the battle for the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine will remind the world of World War II and involve thousands of tanks. That's according to Ukraine's foreign minister.
Indeed, Dmytro Kuleba asked NATO allies to provide everything to fight not only for the country's security, but for everyone's security. But let's find out what's happening on ground in Ukraine today.
We'll have more on the situation on the ground in just a bit, but Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Kyiv had presented Moscow with a draft peace deal that contained unacceptable, he says, elements that Russia would nonetheless continue talks and press to secure its own requirements. The Kremlin believes that peace talks between Moscow and Kyiv are not progressing as rapidly as it would like, and has accused the West of trying to derail negotiations by focusing on allegations of crimes against humanity, which Moscow denies. According to Mr. Lavrov, such inability to agree once again highlights Kyiv's true intentions, its position of drawing out and even undermining the talks by moving away from the understandings reached. He also says Kyiv's proposals are unacceptable, as we pointed out. There were no immediate reactions yet from Ukraine, but Kyiv has said that talks are needed, but it is not willing to give up its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine on February 24th in what it called a special military operation to degrade its southern neighbors' military capabilities and root out people it called dangerous nationalists. Ukrainian forces have held up, mounting stiff resistance, and the West has imposed sweeping sanctions in an effort to force Ukraine to withdraw its forces.
Well, let's now bring you that report about things happening on ground in Ukraine.
Ukraine's Ministry of Defense released drone footage, which it said showed destruction in Borodoyanka, a town in Kyiv region, which was under Russian occupancy and is now back under the Ukrainian flag. The video shows aerial views of damaged and destroyed buildings and roads in the area. The video matched satellite imagery and street-level images of Borodyanka before the invasion, with a major roundabout being the main landmark featured in the footage. Meanwhile, the villages dotted on the outskirts of the northern Ukrainian city of Chernihiv bore the scars of significant damage by bombing. Chernihiv, towards the border with Belarus, was not spared from the telltale shelling, and thousands were left to cope without electricity, heating or water. One bombing in late March destroyed a bridge linking the city to Kyiv, serving the main route for humanitarian aid and the evacuation of wounded people. Members of the Ukrainian Defense Forces found a destroyed Russian Sukhoi Su-34 jet as they inspected the damage to residential area in Chernihiv city. Chernihiv Governor Vyacheslav Chors has accused Russian troops of planting mines as they drew back from positions around the regional capital. Reuters could not independently verify the allegation. The Ukrainian foreign minister says Ukraine will keep up demands on the West for an oil and gas embargo on Russia after its invasion of the country. Dmytro Kuleba also called for the dispatch of more arms and equipment from NATO allies. Kuleba also called for Germany to promptly support an energy embargo against Russia and to deliver weapons to his country's armed forces.
We will continue to insist on full oil and gas embargo for Russia, on de-swifting all Russian banks, on making sure that all ports are closed for Russian vessels and Russian goods with the minimal number of exemptions from it based on humanitarian grounds.
Local officials say more than 300 people were killed by Russian forces in Bucha alone, and around 50 of them were executed.
Now, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has announced that foreign ministers have agreed to sustain and further strengthen support for Ukraine and to step up cooperation with partners, given the global implications of President Putin's unprovoked war on Ukraine. He made this announcement just a while ago. Ministers also agreed to step up practical support to other partners at threat of Russian aggression, including Georgia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, to help strengthen their resilience. Allied foreign ministers were joined by their counterparts from Ukraine, Georgia, Finland, Sweden, and the European Union, and by NATO's Asia-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and the Republic of Korea. NATO will increase its cooperation with Asia-Pacific partners in areas like cyber, new technologies, disinformation, maritime security, climate change, and resilience. Ministers agreed that NATO's next strategic concept, which will be finalized at the Madrid summit in June, must take account of NATO's future relations with Russia and China's growing influence on allied security. Ministers have approved the Charter for a New Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, including a network of innovation hubs, accelerator sites, and test centers across Europe and North America.
Well, staying with NATO Secretary General, he participated in the meeting of G7 foreign ministers to discuss the international response to Russia's brutal, unjustified invasion of Ukraine organized by Germany. The meeting was held at the NATO headquarters on the margins of NATO foreign ministers' meeting. The Secretary General stressed the importance of unity in condemning the war and keeping the pressure on Russia. He thanked the G7 for the essential role it is playing in coordinating both sanctions on Russia and support for Ukraine, as well as in addressing the consequences of the war on global economy. He added that cooperation with like-minded democracies is essential to defend shared values and the rules-based international order. The meeting of G7 foreign ministers follows a meeting of the G7 leaders held at the NATO headquarters on the margins of the extraordinary NATO summit.
The World Health Organization's European chief says the body is preparing for possible chemical assaults on Ukraine. Western officials have repeatedly voiced fears that Russia may use chemical and biological weapons in Ukraine, with risks of spillover effects beyond the country. Russia's defense ministry has accused Kyiv, without providing evidence, of planning a chemical attack against its own people in order to accuse Moscow of using chemical weapons in the invasion of Ukraine that began on February 24. In the same briefing, which was delayed due to an air raid siren in Lviv, Mr. Kluge says that the WHO is also coordinating with the European Union to triage patients arriving from Ukraine and arranging for them to be sent on for treatment within Europe. He says the WHO has already delivered over 185 tons of medical supplies, including material to support trauma across Ukraine, and saying further that 125 tons are on the way for Ukraine.
Do you have the information about the spread of some untypical disease of the current situation? There are no assurances that the war will not get worse. WHO is considering all scenarios and making contingencies for different situations that could afflict the people of Ukraine, from the continued treatment of mass casualties to chemical assaults. WHO is also coordinating with the European Union to triage patients arriving, to make sure that they are received in an EU country that is best placed to treat them. We are channeling support from further afield. The Asia-Europe Foundation has provided $9.5 million from Japan to procure much-needed equipment and provide services to manage COVID-19 as well as communicable diseases, including measles and polio, for Ukraine and its neighbors. As a medical doctor myself, I am here in Ukraine to stand in solidarity with the healthcare workers in the country. I thank them from the bottom of my heart for their dedication and professionalism as they continue to deliver care in the face of unimaginable human suffering. Despite the war, we are determined to support Ukraine and not to lose this momentum. WHO is preparing now to redeploy teams throughout the countries as access and security improves. We are committed to work through a strong, decentralized footprint, both during the current humanitarian response, but also to be there with local and national authorities to rebuild the war-torn health system. Health requires peace. Well-being requires hope. And healing requires time. I speak on behalf of the entire WHO family when I say that it is my deepest wish that this war comes to an end swiftly, without further loss of life.
The world indeed is concerned about what's going on in Ukraine. Let's bring in the former permanent secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi. He joins us now from Abuja. Ambassador Keshi, thank you for joining us on the program today. And I know that you have been monitoring, these meetings have been taking place all day today, the NATO meetings, the G7 meetings as well. And everyone is concerned about, what's going on in Ukraine. But do you think these meetings are actually achieving anything, as the war progresses? We believe you are still muted, Ambassador Keshi. We really can't hear you. We'll try to reconnect with him.
Indeed.
And have that.
Ambassador Keshi?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, yes.
Great. Okay, so
okay.
Do you think this meeting Go on.
Honestly, first, thank you for having me. Honestly, I'm beginning to doubt the efficacy or the needfulness of these meetings. Beyond repeating the same affirmation of support and the promises to send, arms and ammunition as quickly as possible. Look, where we are today, a whole country is being systematically destroyed by the Russians. And all we get from the Western Europeans, and the American ally is a reaffirmation of support. We will do this. We will send arms. We will open corridor. We will help the refugees and so on. I don't think it's enough. I think that where we are today, for me, I think it's time for a different thinking, some strategic thinking that will bring this war to a very quick end.
Indeed, and NATO has been promising support, for Ukraine. I mean, even today, the NATO Secretary General and Jens Stoltenberg talked about, what foreign ministers have agreed, which is to sustain and further strengthen support for Ukraine. In all of this, everything Ukraine has asked for, they really haven't met. Not just NATO, but I mean, other international partners, the US, the UK, all of these countries who have declared verbal support for Ukraine haven't met any of Ukraine's needs, seemingly in the eyes of President Volodymyr Zelensky.
And this is the most unfortunate thing, because look, you're making promises. Yes, let's start from the reality. They have delivered considerable amount of weapons to the Ukrainians, but from the Ukrainian perspective, it is not enough for the kind of onslaught they are facing from the Russians, and so they needed more in order to be able to confront the Russians. But my view is that where we are today, given the massive destruction and devastation of the country, Ukraine itself, I think we all need to begin to rethink the whole, the whole strategy of the Western world in particular. Sanctions, yes, it takes time before sanctions begin to kick in. But everybody you are sanctioning, I'm not too sure that they have felt the impact of the sanctions so far. In the meantime, cities are being destroyed, infrastructure, destroyed. But at the end of this war, if nothing is done at this point in time, I do not think that there will be a country, left to be called Ukraine. So the sooner they get out of all these meetings, take some concrete action. I mean, let's face it, the way we put it, sometimes a man got to do what a man got to do, and it is time for the Western world in particular, because they cannot be exonerated from, some guilt in this war. It is time they step in very, very forcefully in order to compel Russia to rethink, whatever its objectives are from the beginning.
Interestingly, Ambassador Keshi, on the issue of sanctions, you appear to be in agreement with China that says, over 8,000 sanctions, Russia has gotten no impact, no effect that much, and, the war continues. But you've talked about another strategy to ending this war. What would that be? Because we know that the Ukrainian foreign minister went to the meeting today saying weapons, weapons, and more weapons.
Look, you remember what happened in the old Yugoslavia? Many people died before the Western world stepped in. In Rwanda, the same thing. What do they call it? Libya, the same thing. Eventually, they stepped in. Is it because these countries are third world countries that they stepped in? Look, look, the first mistake I believe NATO and its allies made was, I keep saying this, was to take off, was to remove force from all the options available. If they had insisted that force was among the options available, I'm not sure that Russia would have attacked, and I'm not sure Russia would be as crazy in its behavior as it is today. Look, if you have a heart, you cannot sit down in your room and watch television and see the suffering of the people of Ukraine and believe that it is not time for some action. Moving more military support into Ukraine, or even providing the much needed, air cover, would honestly bring some relief to the Ukrainian army and the people that are fighting this war. By every indication, given the massive destruction that Russia has, inflicted on Ukraine, for me, as a person today, I'm in favor of the military action by the global community in stopping, the Russian involvement in Ukraine. We can't continue to see deaths and destruction, and all we do is promise, 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 and not much is being delivered. Or at least it's not fast enough, and it's not getting to the people who need it very urgently.
But I think the goal here really is to avoid another world war, and I think that that's probably where NATO's thoughts are directed. If NATO, as a combined body, does send boots on the ground, does send weapons, does fight alongside Ukrainian forces, wouldn't that be considered enough provocation for Russia to go all out on Ukraine as well as NATO allies?
Look, Amarachi, I'm not a military strategist, but the little we have seen, from the performance of the Russian army, I don't think should frighten NATO and its American allies. I believe that they can stop this war within a week if they move in. I might be too optimistic, but the truth of the matter is that when you look at what Ukraine, without much in terms of arms and ammunition or weapons, have done to keep a lot of their country intact. Imagine the combined forces of NATO and the United States moving into Ukraine to stop the Russian army. They will certainly stop this madness that we are all witnessing. And for me, it is time that some new thinking is involved in trying to help the people of Ukraine. If they honestly listen, the question we should ask ourselves is, when will they honestly do something else? Is it when the whole country is completely destroyed? Are we not being affected by the massive destruction and devastation that we continue to see every time you open or you put on CNN or Al Jazeera, even your station? Look at the picture you are showing. How many more of this would happen before somebody comes and says, look, enough is enough. Let's fight this war. Let's end it.
Indeed. Ambassador, just before you go, just one more question. Do you think this is a a problem of NATO being afraid of Russia and what Russia can do in Europe?
You see, again, let me repeat what I said before. I said I'm not a military strategist, but from what we have seen so far, if in the last more than 1 month, Ukraine can withstand the mighty Russian there, NATO and its American allies can do better. That is my position. And I believe they can. They have the weapon, they have the men. And I think that, look, what else is there to fight? Just remove them from a few strategic places and get them out of the country. And let Putin decide whether he wants to face the rest of the world or not. By the way, the rest of the world is already suffering. If you look at some of the political upheavals in 1 or 2 countries because of food and other things that do come from Ukraine and Russia, the world is already being affected. Is it when there is more chaos in the global world before somebody begins to say we need to change our strategy? I don't think so. I believe that this is the time to change strategy and call the bluff of Russia. Let's call the bluff of Russia. I don't think it will lead to any serious world war or the use of nuclear. I believe they can handle this. So let's call Russia's bluff and face the reality on the ground.
Former Permanent Secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi, thank you for joining us. You say you're not a military strategist, but you're talking like one. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Stay with us. We still have more coming up after the break. Former ambassador to Ukraine predicts Russia invasion of Ukraine may persist, says Africa should prepare to bear some economic effects.
Stay with us.
Welcome back. In an early morning video address, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine said he would continue to insist Russian banks be completely blocked from the international finance system. Russia's 6-week-long invasion of Ukraine has forced over 4 million people to flee and killed many, also injured thousands and left cities and towns destroyed.
Zelensky said Moscow was making so much money from oil exports that it did not need to take peace talks seriously and called on the democratic world to shun Russian crude. He said some politicians are still unable to decide how to limit the flow of petrodollars and oil euros to Russia so as not to put their own economies at risk. Zelensky is predicting that an oil embargo would nevertheless be imposed.
According to Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby, Ukraine can win the war against Russia. He told a news briefing where he also discussed the shipments of new weapon systems to Ukraine, such as 100 Switchblade drones known as kamikaze drones and thousands of Javelin anti-tank systems.
Mr. Putin has achieved exactly zero of his strategic objectives inside Ukraine. He didn't take Kyiv. He didn't topple the government. He didn't remove Ukraine as a nation state. And he's really only taken control of a small number of population centers, and even they weren't the ones that he was really going after. He's moved his forces out of Kyiv. He's moved his forces out of Chernihiv. They haven't taken Kharkiv. They haven't taken Mykolaiv in the south. I think the proof is literally in the outcomes that you're seeing every day. The Ukrainians are bravely fighting for their country, and they have denied Mr. Putin so many of his strategic objectives. I would tell you that it could end today. It could end today if Mr. Putin did the right thing, sat down in good faith with the Ukrainians, withdrew all his troops, sent them home, and respected Ukrainian sovereignty. He obviously is choosing a different path.
Well, back to Russia's oil. EU lawmakers today overwhelmingly approved a resolution for an immediate full embargo on Russian imports of oil, coal, nuclear fuel and gas. And a non-binding resolution adopted with 513 votes for 22 against and 19 abstentions. EU lawmakers also called for the EU to step up delivery of weapons and to help with the creation of a special UN tribunal for war crimes in Ukraine. They said this is a very important moment and significant step, that they hope the parliament is clear and sends the strongest of messages to support the people on the front line in Ukraine. EU Parliament President Roberta Metsola told lawmakers after the vote, saying that outrage over killings of civilians in the Ukrainian town of Bucha near Kyiv appeared to have galvanized this Western support. Of course, Russia denies any wrongdoing. And while a possible EU ban on Russian oil and gas could cut off a significant source of resource for Moscow's war, it would also hit European economies and push up soaring gas prices.
According to Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, Russia is facing its most difficult situation in 3 decades due to unprecedented Western sanctions, but foreign attempts to isolate it from the global economy will fail. Foreign companies should allow their businesses to continue working in Russia, even if they themselves decide to leave, to maintain jobs for Russian citizens, according to Mishustin. He also says people's living standards cannot depend on the caprices of foreign politicians, and that Russia had managed to withstand unprecedented Western sanctions imposed in response to Moscow's decision to send its armed forces into Ukraine.
The Russian-Ukraine conflict since February 24th has played a significant role in pushing energy costs across Europe and beyond, which has been reflected in the costs of food and other goods. In Greece, the average inflation rate reached 8% in March. For the European Union overall, it was 7.5%. Businesses and households continue to face a massive wave of price increases, with the government struggling to reel them in. Authorities are subsidizing fuel even more than usual and have cut sales tax for businesses and students. The surge in consumer prices has been driven by the prices of electricity and fuel, especially gasoline. It is the highest in 40 years. In Greece, over the past year, electricity prices increased by over 70%, with the prices of natural gas up over 78%, forcing the government to intervene. According to Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, it says that they are announcing measures for the most vulnerable, but also the middle class. It said they've thought it through and will be subsidizing an additional $2 billion with the hope to bring some relief to 3.2 million vulnerable citizens, but also households that make less than $32,000 a month. The measures also apply to anyone who needs them. They also plan to boost with grants and those with low salaries and with low pensions. Over 40% of Greece's energy comes from natural gas imports, making it particularly vulnerable to the price hikes. The country is still paying debts dating from 2008's financial crisis. High inflation is also one of the main obstacles to the economic recovery.
And in Odessa, a stealthier war is being fought by volunteers using keyboards and code against Ukraine's aggressor, Russia. A 40-year-old IT manager, Andrew, runs a website that enables people around the world to attack Russian websites and online infrastructure from their own computers. According to Andrew, the website he manages gives instructions on how to launch cyber attacks on Russian banks, governmental and military infrastructure. He said he received targets and instructions on a Ukrainian government Telegram channel. On February 26, 2 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, the country's Vice Prime Minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, said Ukraine would create an IT army to fight against Russia's digital intrusions.
The Kremlin has said that Washington's decision to keep supplying Ukraine with weapons and military assistance would probably damage chances of successful peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. According to the Kremlin, pumping weapons into Ukraine will not contribute to the success of Russian-Ukrainian talks. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said in a conference call with reporters when asked about U.S. weapons supplies to Ukraine. He says that, of course, they consider the sanctions in themselves to be the extension of an absolutely rabid position on the imposition of restrictions. He said, in any case, the ongoing line on imposing restrictions against family members speaks for itself. Putin's daughter, Katerina Takhanova, is a tech executive whose work supports the Russian government and its defense industry, according to details in the U.S. sanctions package, which was announced on Wednesday. His other daughter, Maria Vorontsova, leads government-funded programs that have received billions of dollars from the Kremlin towards genetics research and are personally overseen by Putin. This is also information from the United States. Putin has always kept his family's private life out of the spotlight. The Kremlin has usually dismissed questions about them, citing his right to privacy. Peskov also said that the Kremlin would make a decision on whether Russian President Vladimir Putin takes part in a G20 summit later this year in Indonesia based on how events evolve.
Well, as we end the program, just a recap of what we have mentioned today. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba saying that the battle in the Donbas region will remind the world of World War II and involve thousands of tanks, according to him. He also asked NATO allies to provide everything that they need. They will not only fight for their security, but for the security of NATO countries themselves. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced that the alliance is ready to strengthen support for Ukraine, but did not provide any details of the weapons that will be used. We're learning also right now that Russia has been suspended from the UN Human Rights Council over alleged war crimes after a vote in New York. Not sure now how countries really voted during, this resolution that was to be taken. But according to the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, war criminals have no place in UN bodies aimed at protecting human rights. Grateful to all member states which supported the relevant UNGA resolution and chose the right side of history.
And that's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.
And I'm Amarachi Ubani.